So thank you so much, everyone, and welcome to this panel, which is an official side event of the Global Digital Development Forum. We invite you to check as well what's going on with the Global Digital Development Forum today and tomorrow. You can see on the website www.digitaldevforum.com to connect to a lot more sessions from all around the world. For this event, it's brought to you by Response Innovation Lab. My name is Charlène Cabot. I'm the manager for Response Innovation Lab Uganda. And we are very happy to bring you a session on how can open source contribute to the growth of digital innovations in Uganda. We have a really nice group of panelists today, and we have the pleasure to have Deborah Aanyu from Open Source Society Africa, Kampala chapter, as our moderator. So we have both online panelists and in-person panelists, as well as audience. If you're here in person, you may have seen the QR code behind your name tag. Please do scan it and check the social media and spread the word about the event. If you're online, we will share on the chat box the details to get also participating in that discussion. We want to make sure the online people also get a chance to contribute and be interacting with us. So if you're joining us online at any moment, if you have a question, please type it in the chat box. We will make sure we gather the questions and we can share them with the panel during the Q&A. If you are sitting here with us, you will see on the table some forms for questions. So please also, during the presentations and the interventions, you can use those forms for questions and write out questions. Sol will come around and pick them up so we can start collecting your questions live during the activity. How can open source contribute to the growth of digital innovations in Uganda? We're bringing this question for discussion today as a part of an activity that we're doing in partnership with URIDU. URIDU is a German NGO that focuses on creating public goods and has launched an initiative called Open Source for Equality, OSEC. And Open Source for Equality is a global initiative that focuses on supporting the growth of open source software and content so that it can contribute to equality and inclusive development. We really believe there is a high potential for open source content and software to make a contribution to the lives of the people who need more development and more opportunities. And in the coming years, this is really an opportunity we need to seize as the ecosystem in Uganda and encourage talent, creative ideas, and partnership opportunities to grow these digital innovations with the objective of supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. At the moment, open source contributions by Africa only represents around 1% of the contributions around the world. And this is why we wanted to encourage a dialogue on this question. And so to take us through, I'm now inviting Deborah, our moderator. Deborah Aanyu is the lead of the Kampala chapter of the open source community in Africa. She is also a passionate open source contributor herself, and she's worked, for instance, on initiatives like Outreachy, which you may have heard of, and focuses on supporting diversity by providing internship opportunities in open source and science to groups of people who are otherwise underrepresented. Deborah is a software developer, a software engineer, and a technical writer, and she also takes joy in mentoring young people in technology. She's the lead of the chapter for Open Source Society Africa since the chapter was launched in June 2021. And this is a community of creative minds that is really trying to drive open source community all over Africa, including in Uganda. Trying to spread the word and encourage Africans to be contributors to open source, but not just contributors, to be creators and being the lead of this growth of digital innovations. Deborah, thank you for accepting to moderate this panel. Can we have a round of applause for Deborah, please?
Thank you, Charlène. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome you all to this year's Global Digital Development Forum 2022. My name is Deborah Aanyu. I'm from the Open Source Community of Africa, where I'm the chapter lead. We've been around since June 2021, and we are just trying to spread the gospel of open source. So it's my great pleasure to be moderating this event today. Yeah, so the theme for today's discussion, as Charlène has said, we're going to discuss how can open source be a model that can drive the growth of local digital innovations. So we're going to have an expert discussion by our panelists today, who I'll introduce you to, after which we shall have a live Q&A. We shall entertain questions from our in-person audience and also our online audience. So as the discussions go on, please feel free to forward your questions in the comment section. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our panelists today. We have 3 panelists today present with us physically and 3 panelists online. So let me just begin with our physical panelists. First and foremost, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Richard Zulu from Outbox. Please give a round of applause to Mr. Richard Zulu. Mr. Richard Zulu is the founder of Hive Collab. Outbox, sorry, my bad. Mr. Richard Zulu is the founder of Outbox, and he has over 6 years of experience providing support to ecosystems in the digital space and also to startups and communities in the tech space. Thank you, Mr. Richard Zulu. And then secondly, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Allan Mbabani from OpenStreetMap, Uganda. Please give a round of applause to Mr. Allan. Yeah. So Mr. Allan Mbabani has had a lot of experience in data collection, data analysis, and data visualization. He has worked with refugees. He's also had a lot of experience using data to promote open source innovations in the digital space. Please also welcome Miss Barbara, who is with us today. Miss Barbara Birungi. Miss Barbara Birungi is the founder of Hive Collab, and she's the real founder of Hive Collab. And she's the founder of Women in Technology Uganda, which is aimed at encouraging women and young girls to take up careers in the technology space. Yeah, so on to our online panel. Please welcome Mr. Marcel Heyne, who is the founder of URIDU, and he's also the founder of Audiopedia, which is a digital solution that aims to deliver digital, information in terms of audio, like audio information, to underrepresented groups and people who don't have that much access to information and resources. And he's also the founder of the Open Source for Equality initiative, as we shall get to learn about as the panel discussion goes on. Also, please welcome Ms. Aidah. Ms. Aidah is the founder of AYDIA, Gender and, is it technology? Just a minute. Yes. She's also had extensive experience working with women and girls. She's been encouraging them to take up careers in the tech space, and just to encourage them to take up careers in science, technology, engineering, and maths. Yeah, so lastly, please welcome Mr. Peter Batali from CTEN. Mr. Peter Batali has had, he's the executive director for CTEN, which is the communication technology, I've forgotten the full form, but the audience members know about CTEN. He has worked with refugees also in specifically northern Uganda, and most of them are from the southern Sudan region. Yeah, please welcome. Let's give a round of applause to our panel again, once again, as we kickstart our discussion. So, to kickstart our discussion, I'm going to ask our panelists various questions that have been put forward by, interested and enthusiastic people in that space. So, Mr. Richard Zulu, how open are digital innovations, software developers, digital innovators, software developers, and content creators to the idea of using open source in Uganda? How prevalent would you say open source is, and what are some of the common fears?
Hello. Good morning to you all. I've been introduced as a team lead at Outbox, but I am also a chairperson of Startup Uganda, which is an association of up to 28 innovation and entrepreneurship support organizations in Uganda. So it's nice to be here, and thank you all for coming in person or joining us online. I can best respond to that question using part of my experience over the years. I am an old relic in the ecosystem here, the innovation ecosystem, and when I did start out in my work, if I can recall, over 11 years ago, there was some initiatives to really drive the awareness and adoption around open source software. At that time, there was what we used to call the Linux user group, which was this interesting list that started online and transitioned into in-person engagements, but largely driven by the need to see how various communities use Linux as an open source tool in networking. At the time, I was working at Makerere University in a department called the Directorate of ICT Support, DICTS. This department was responsible for setting up most of the infrastructure in the university, funded by CEDA. But most of that infrastructure, from the servers, the points, the firewalls, were all running on Linux, all built from the ground up. So the Linux user group was a very good initiative, because then we saw quite a number of young people starting to think about what open source is and how they could possibly use it. But fast forward, when you look at what our landscape looks like in terms of where we are now, we've seen government and development partners adopt a lot of open source. Some of you might know, our data warehouse in health, in public health, is run on a platform called DHIS2. Okay? Then you have OpenEMR that is running in a number of health facilities, supported by the Makerere University School of Public Health and the Ministry of Health. You have Rapid Pro, which is an open source tool, where UNICEF is also working on such initiatives, and very many others, the most recent in COVID being Colibri, which is this open source tool that was deployed by the National Information Technology Authority, NITAYU, in partnership with UNICEF, to encourage online learning and access. So we're seeing quite a lot of initiatives here and there trying to drive the adoption of open source. But when you also look at the private sector, what we've seen happening with many developers and creators out there is some of them are using open source tools without knowing it, but this has largely been supplemented by the work of large entities, the Googles, the Microsofts, where the technology you use to build a website is open source, but without you knowing, okay? The likes of JavaScript. Android is a very good example of open source. So we've seen many in the private sector adopt and build tools around open source technologies. But what we're starting to see now is, if you look at the public sector, this movement of open source tools has largely been in health, education, but government, from what I'm seeing with the trends, is to try and push as many e-government services as possible. That means do that, it has to be sustainable. And so there is a very big call in terms of how we can leverage open source tools to build e-government services going forward. But when you look at our content creators, one of the things we've seen is that it's not just about you learning to build for DHIS2. It's not about you contributing to a tool that's helping maybe deliver food to refugee settlements. We also have to look at the persona of a digital innovator in terms of job creation, in terms of how they can sustain themselves. So, just a minute. Sorry, I forgot to turn this off. So, what we need to pay attention to are the worries of our young people as we try to build an open source community. If I build, or if I skill myself in DHIS2, what's the end in mind, right? Is there a job, or is there an opportunity for my business? And these are some of the worries that we're seeing, that open source and market access in our context have not been moving together, right? So in as much as my friend here, Solomon, has spent time running very many developer communities around open source tools, the key question and the worry that we have to address as we move forward is that aspect of sustainability and the aspect of job creation as we seek to create this impact. So we have to have that in mind as we move forward to keep our digital innovators as open as possible to the adoption of open source tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Zulu. Those have been some really remarkable contributions. Just to follow up on your discussion regarding creators of open source tools, what would be some of the recommendations or advice you'd give to leaders of open source communities trying to promote local digital innovations?
I think for me, everything should be hinged in not only an impact case, but also a business case. So if you brought to me, if you try to push for the adoption of a tool like OpenEMR, which is being used in health facilities, from my perspective as an innovator, how many job opportunities are out there for me to learn this technology and adopt it? Do I have an opportunity for my business to ride on top of this and offer service to the target audience that seeks to benefit from this? I think for me, first and foremost, that is important. The second is part of the job creation also comes into, I don't know if many of you know, but when we're trying to look at the talent around the world, open source repositories are used a lot. And Ugandans, we are not doing very well in terms of contributing to that. I think someone from Tunga here can share what they saw from their research regarding that. But also that value proposition of the global appeal of a digital innovator contributing to an open source platform and the opportunities that it can open up for them is very, very important. Also from a learning perspective. But we are not communicating that well in terms of how we bring most of these people into the fold of trying to adopt open source software. Okay. So those are largely some of the key recommendations I would make, that yes, we should drive for impact with the communities we serve with, but it's a multi-sided market. You have a demand side, who are the beneficiaries of the value these tools deliver, and you have a supply side to which I'm speaking, which is these individuals who build for these tools to add value that then trickles down onto the demand side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard. I like the submission you gave about the market, and also basically, the market side is very important, because what I've noticed with many open source developers, they create tools and they haven't really put in the initiative to put them to market on a global scale. So I think that's a very important submission. Thank you very much. So my next question will be directed to Mr. Marcel Heyne, who is joining us online. Mr. Heyne, since URIDU is launching the Open Source for Equality initiative, please tell us why. Why does your organization believe that open source has the potential to support the growth of local digital innovations and contribute to the impact for communities?
Thank you, Deborah, and hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you. So, first of all, our organization, URIDU, has been spearheading the development of Neurocasting for development during the last 6 years. What Deborah already mentioned is that we are creating solutions that help make vital knowledge and practical information accessible to marginalized communities. So we have built a platform that we call Audiopedia, which is an open platform, which is built on a media wiki technology. And it contains a digital clips, digital audio information about various topics like health, nutrition, etc. And at the same time, we developed solutions to make those contents accessible to marginalized communities. We started out with solar-powered audio players, but nowadays we're using more and more web applications and, for example, local Wi-Fi's to make those contents accessible. And now, what we're doing now is we are open sourcing those solutions, because we believe that this is the way, the best way to scale them. And when I first told that to colleagues in Nigeria, said, well, that doesn't make any sense. We need, how can we make a living? How can we create jobs if we open source that? And I think there are like two misconceptions here. First of all, and I would like to differentiate between what I would call the first wave and the second wave of open source. The first wave of open source, well, it started like 20-something years ago, and well, we're talking about products like Linux, that was already mentioned, and we're talking about Firefox, we're talking about OpenOffice, etc. So the original wave, the idea of the original wave was basically to create open and free alternatives, mostly to Microsoft products, and I'm kind of exaggerating here, but of course, if you look at that, then it makes sense to ask yourself, okay, how can I create a job opportunity out of that? But still, we know that even during the first wave of open source, there have been examples of large organizations that made or created a business out of it. Take, for example, Red Hat, an organization that is also supporting open source, our Open Source for Equality initiative. This is a large company with more than 20,000 employees worldwide. But I think it's important to understand that we have already entered into a second wave of open source, and I believe this started like 2015, where the idea came up that open source can play a vital role in development cooperation, a vital role in attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, the idea has been there before, but 2015, the principles for digital development have been launched by USAID. We're talking here about some guidelines for digital development. And those guidelines contain, for example, the idea of having locally led development, user-centric development, but they already state that digital development for cooperation should focus on open source, open content, open AI, etc. And this further developed into a term that has been coined in 2017, the term of digital public goods. So basically, digital public goods are open source, open contents, open AI that help attain the Sustainable Development Goals. And this has been further materialized into the creation of the Digital Public Good Alliance. The United Nations Development Program is part of it. UNICEF is part of it. Also, the German government is a part of it. And the UN Roadmap for Digital Cooperation states as one of their 8 pillars that digital public goods should be created to promote sustainable development goals. So, development cooperation is focusing a lot on a digital transformation, and this digital transformation should be done, and this is clearly expressed, using open tools. And as Richard already mentioned, DHIS2, etc., and other software packages, open software package, are already in use, but those are used mainly by governments. So the next wave will be directed also towards NGOs, and this is basically where I see a great opportunity. So the thing is that NGOs will need to adopt digital tools, open digital tools, to secure their funding in the future. That is clear, and this is something that we've been seeing over the last years. More and more calls for proposals are looking for digital tools. And we see that NGOs are approaching us because they say, okay, we need to differentiate ourselves to secure funding. What can we do? What can we develop together? And this is I think there's the opportunity for local or open source developers. Because from our experience, many NGOs lack the capabilities, the capacities, the knowledge when it comes to building open source tools. And so we believe that that developers can chip in there because there are like three areas where they can contribute. The first area is consulting. NGOs need to understand how they can use tools for specific settings, for specific target groups, for specific goals. Second would be customization. So using open source, customizing it for the needs of the NGOs. And the third would be coaching. So basically helping the NGOs build the capacity to use those tools, or helping the beneficiaries build the capacity to use those tools. So basically digital literacy trainings, etc., etc. This sounds like complicated, but what we're trying to do with open source for equality is to provide, first of all, create awareness for this. And as a matter of fact, quite recently, the United Development Program launched a Digital X Challenge, where they're looking for open tools that are already ready to scale, and they will fund if one of those tools, if they select those tools, they would fund the tools with up to $100,000 US. But the thing is, what we want to provide with open source for equality, it's like a toolbox, like having our tools that we are currently open sourcing as a starting point, where you can actually start right now building something, and maybe start something to build something for your local community-based organization as a starting point, to learn a bit, to gain some expertise, and then later talk to NGOs and see how you can work with them. So basically what we see is that there is a shift in development cooperation towards the digital transformation using open tools, and we believe that those tools should be developed locally, should be developed with a user-centric approach, and so there's a necessity to do this locally, and this provides a huge opportunity for open source developers.
Recording in progress.
Because it creates a market, and Richard has talked about demand and supply. We believe that the demand for those tools is growing, and this is why we want to create awareness and prepare developers to think in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Marcel. You raise a really good point here about non-government organizations. I'm just wondering, is there a world in which we can involve the government in supporting local digital innovations and encouraging developers and local creators to use open source tools?
I believe so. I think the government can play a role, but also the great, the donor organizations will create a role. The point is, I think when I see how the international community, UN organizations, and also the German government are thinking, then the idea is really to create a market. For example, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development is supporting training programs also in sub-Saharan Africa for training programs that will push a digital transformation. So everybody is thinking about creating local markets where local developers can develop those solutions. And I believe this is still at an early stage, but I think from the top, the important players will be local government, but also international cooperation, hopefully we will be able to create this market that will allow NGOs to act on their digital transformation, that will allow NGOs to scale their operations, make it more robust. I think, for example, during the COVID pandemic, with the lockdowns, NGOs had a hard time reaching out to their beneficiaries. If they would have had digital solutions, they would have been better prepared. So the need for digital open solutions is there. The motivation is there, and I think during the next 5 years we will see a lot of developments in those areas. And so now is the time to prepare and to think in that direction in order to be there when the funding arrives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcel.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll direct my next question to Ms. Aidah Bukubuza, who is the founder and team leader for AYDIA Gender and Technology Initiative. Ms. Aidah, what barriers or risks do you think prevent digital innovators, software developers, and content creators from leveraging open source and seizing these opportunities to work, for instance, on attaining the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. I like the fact that Marcelo just mentioned something to do with their work in regards to equality. So for me, when equality is highlighted, I first of all speak as a woman in such spaces whereby it is pretty obvious there's been quite a number of conversations about our underrepresentations and contribution in such spaces. But I do want to highlight a little bit of things because I think Mr. Zulu already highlighted quite a number of things and I don't want to drive back to that. But I wanted to look at, number one, the policies governing or the policies around how people do operate and how is it convenient for the women or the gender inclusivity to have an enabling environment. Yeah. So it comes down to how do we as women, even when there have been quite a number of conversations and development partners, Marcel was talking about how they are helping NGOs and, you know, how to make sure they do leverage in such spaces. However, when it comes to women staying in such careers is a very big challenge. So for me, I would say one of the things is, even when there's been conversations to have more women or more people in such spaces, is there research, is there a way that we can find out that people are staying in such careers so that they can make contribution to such spaces? That is one of the questions I do have and one of the questions that I want to address in that regard. So, and what really makes this happen and have such a very big and a huge digital divide gap is the fact that we do not have mentorship, yeah? If I am to ask or if I'm to look around the couple of people who have been in such spaces before us or with us and those who are staying as women, the numbers keep on dropping. Not because people are not empowered. Is the empowerment enough? It may not be so enough, but there is a shift. We cannot dismiss that fact as women in this particular space. However, there is no research or there is no research that people are actually dropping out and for what particular reasons are they dropping out as women, first of all, or even young developers, because this particular topic and conversation actually comes in very handy because recently I think we had the International Intellectual Property Day. So when Mr. Zulu talks about the demand and the supply bit of it, how the people developing these softwares, how do they gain? It brings in a question on how do they have the right and what do they know, or what kind of literacy and knowledge do they have towards contributing, and how is it relevant to their well-being? Because at the end of the day, people need to survive. We work in a world of entrepreneurship. If I'm going to contribute to something that is not going to give me a win at the end of the day, that is the reason we do have such shifts out of these particular careers. Maybe my other point would be on the knowledge for policies in terms of leading companies or leading people overpower for these young developers and young people, because when you look at Uganda, we are a very local society or very local country. So quite a number of people who are going to be in such spaces are going to be young people. And I will just use that theme for this year on Intellectual Property Day, which was about IP and the youth, and it was talking about innovations for a better future. So where do we place the people that are contributing to such spaces in terms of who has, because oftentimes people are very excited, but when it comes to power over and owning this knowledge, there is a monopoly over their, innovations and everything around that the work they do. Yeah, and maybe third thing I would say would be on safety, general safety, and I'll go direct to things like maybe gender-based violence in terms of in line with the online spaces. So there's quite a number of conversations when we are talking about, we have to have more women, or we have to have more people on board in such spaces. But the conversation around people's safety when it comes to these spaces is still very pertinent, and there is not so much that is being talked about as we do in our general talking and the general space and the physical space where we do operate and share ideas and have these great conversations about. There is a lot going on that is making people shift out of these particular careers online, probably when it comes to data protection, in terms of how the breaches are going on, in terms of the knowledge over policies that I just shared in the previous point. So these are the very few things that I can address. And lastly, for me, I'll talk about the gender technology inclusivity. I'll not drive deeper because I know you mentioned that Ms. Birungi is on the panel. And one of the things that I can really highlight is something to do with gender inclusivity. Where do we place women when it comes to such spaces? Are we having women on board because we want to show the world that, actually there is someone, Aidah and Deborah on the panel? Or do we just want them for picture moments? Or do we want to hear their contributions and voices and allowing them to make a contribution in such spaces? Because we may have a chance, but there's quite a number of other people who may not have such a chance to be in such spaces and make a contribution, or even be given such an opportunity to share and make a contribution to the ecosystem. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aidah. I like the point you raised about safety of women in tech spaces. I personally heard of a story of one of the tech spaces whereby a lady was brought on board, and then she was given that tech role, but then she was also expected to cook and clean, which is more of a sexist role. So, but then this is a professional setting, and we should all be doing, our professional jobs. So I like the point you raised about safety. Thank you, Ms. Aidah. So my next question will also go to another panelist of ours, who is also passionate about gender inclusivity in tech spaces, Ms. Barbara. Let's dig a little deeper into the question of opportunities and incentives. How can women be supported to fully leverage these new trends in digital development? How can we foster an inclusive growth of open source innovations, making sure solutions are developed by women and men and for women and men?
Thank you, Deborah. I want us to start with looking at the root causes of why women are not really in the tech space, and when we get there, there is a decline. First year, second year, and then after that, women are dropping out. It starts with addressing societal challenges, the way we view women in the tech space, or girls even in the tech space. When you go back to where you are probably in secondary school, if it was in the early 2000s like myself, you find that The computer labs in the schools, first of all, were limited, and the classes were really large. Now, there's this thing about girls not being allowed to run. Like, it's, at least in my school, it was unheard of for you to run. While boys, they could run. So what would happen is that the boys would run, take all the seats, and then it was not examinable really, so we would get there, look around, and consider that as a free period. The lab is full, we don't have space, and it wasn't examinable. So we ended up missing out like that. But I picked out interest because of a particular game in tech, and I started going to a window. The window wasn't for fighting, so I would just go to the window and learn through the window until the teacher noticed and said, this girl is always, I was a very tiny girl, you can't believe it. So he was like, this girl is always at this window. And he started saving me a seat. That one teacher's actions, I believe, led me to where I am today and the interest I have in tech. So if we want to put these opportunities in front of women, we need to level the ground. Access is very key, starting right from school, so that as a young girl, I grow up knowing, yes, I can do this. If men can be in tech, I can also be there. Aidah talked about role models. It's very key. When I came into the tech space, I worked for a software development consultancy, Africa Labs, and I was the only woman in there. And I kept asking myself, okay, so what next? I was this ambitious girl who wanted to do more school, but I wasn't even sure, okay, if I want to do more school, what should I be doing? And which later on led me to start Women in Tech. So we need to look at the access aspect and also the inspiration bit. Aidah talked about bringing women on board, not just as flowers or to show that you are fulfilling a requirement or showing that your tech company is doing this, but looking at us as equal participants in this field, yeah? But then also, as you bring on women, you also have to consider that by nature, there are other things that we expected to do. You talked about someone being hired to be a software developer or a techie and they expect you to cook.
Yeah.
What the? Anyway, leveling it in such a way that as when you're hiring women, it's not just about the work. Make it flexible. It doesn't mean that if I don't walk into office, as long as I know my KPI is really, I don't need to sit in an office space. I can be breastfeeding a child as I actually do code or whatever it is that I need to do. So we need, as private sector, as organizations, even public sector, we need to create those spaces. I'm very impressed by organizations these days that are creating spaces for mothers to, like daycares in their workspaces, yeah? Because if you look at the things that take women out and not participate in the digital economy or digital space, those are the things. When you hear, if let's say 3 months you have to go back to work after having your baby, and then you hear of a maid who's mistreating a child, you sit at home and you're thinking, okay, why am I even working? Is my child safe? Let me first take off 3 years, yeah? And then in the 3 years, you learn how to bake. And then cakes are making money, which is not bad. And then are you going to go back to the tech space? Because this job is giving you the liberty to raise your child as you also work. Most times when people see a pregnant woman on an interview, they're like, no. But who says being pregnant is not a disability? I can, as long as I am at that point where I believe I can do it, I should be given that, that opportunity and that chance. But then also to give the opportunities to women, how do we bring them closer? We have to look at affordability of the tech that we need to be able to either build and contribute to solutions. When you look here in Kampala, in this room, almost all of us can afford a computer or machine. But beyond Kampala, beyond this room, how many people can actually, even if the girl has good interest, as women in tech, we are in Ajumani with code clubs, teaching these girls how to code and all. Some of them are really brilliant. They're really interested. They're hammering that code that we are giving them. But once she goes out of that school and we have no access to her, where is she going to find a computer to be able to practice and continue growing her tech skill? Nowhere. So for me, government needs to come in. Things like computers and phones should not be taxed, my own opinion. Or at least they should be avenues where not even just for girls, because this is a problem that also affects men or boys who are trying to grow their tech career. Create spaces where people have access to the tech, the devices that they need to be able to create, not just the computer. If someone wants to build something in IoT, where are the devices that they can use? Maybe they'll go on YouTube. If they have access, they'll learn something, and they just miss that Cabot, and that Cabot is in China, and to ship it here to Uganda. So we do still have a number of challenges as a country that limit us from being able to participate. But for women specifically, accessibility, affordability, and safety that Aidah talked about, both online and offline. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Barbara. So you talked about, as we discussed the topic of inclusivity in tech spaces, do you think it would be useful for digital organizations and open source projects to publish their diversity or gender gap numbers on, let's say, their website or open access information sites? Do you think that would play some role in trying to close the gender gap?
Absolutely. As a young woman, if I see that there are other people in the space, there's that thing as a young girl when you're growing up, even in homes where if you say you want to be a techie, they're like, mommy, what are you trying to do? Maybe you go for this and this. So if I see there are other women, even as a young girl, if I'm arguing with my parents, I'll be like, but don't you see so and so? She's doing it. Why can't I do it? The other thing is around technical skill. We really don't have our skill is still very limited if you compare us to a global scale. So we need to build the technical skill of people. As we publish that data, we also need to do more research. Aidah talked about lack of research, not just a Uganda problem actually, it's an African problem or global problem where we don't have enough research on what are the constraints or the reasons that women are going out of this space. And when we have that data and the visibility, then we can do something about it actively. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I agree with you completely. In my personal observation, when I go to tech space site and I see the front page of their site is, let's say, because usually there's like a group of people who are posing for a photo, and you find like that 8 men and only 2 women. So that already tells me the gender gap in that organization. But I may be false, I may be, that's how I take it. So without further ado, let me direct my next question to Mr. Batali, who is the Executive Director for CTEN. Mr. Batali, could you tell us about the opportunities that CTEN and some of your partners have been able to leverage thanks to open source software and content?
Hello, thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Peter Batali. I am a refugee for the 3rd time in Uganda. I was born in Yei and I grew a lot in Uganda, and then I came to the UK as a refugee, leveraging the benefit of information sharing. I was able to get information about how to come to the UK, how to join a relative here in the UK. So I am I'm a living beneficiary of open source technology right from the 1990s. So I wanted to really appreciate all previous speakers, and just the recent speaker, Barbara, highlighted a lot of issues. We established CTEN in Yei, and we focus on digital literacy. But after the conflict in 2016, when we were settled in Rhino Camp refugee settlement, we quickly re-established the CTEN. The idea of the CTEN is that we wanted to attract people who love technology, both women and girls, so that we can empower a community. So the first thing we did in Rhino Camp is to think of how do we make information accessible or shareable to the relatives of these refugees within the settlement and also back home in South Sudan, and with the thousands of relatives that are out there in the different continents, UK, Europe, Canada, Australia. So then we quickly established a center called Refugee Information Center. and that is where we were able to mobilize. The community was able to come around, and we were able to share information. But leveraging open source technology, from the very onset in the emergency, we were able to reunite families. Those that had brothers and sisters or husbands left behind in the world, they were able to communicate. Brothers and sisters and friends, they were able to chat using the Facebook, because we made sure that there was a tool called the MTN device for accessing internet. We put credit on it, and we were able to access internet in the remote settlement of Rhinocamp. On many occasions, we put the modem up, and then we were able to enjoy the internet on the floor. So connecting communities has been very vital part of our what we did during the emergency. But as things grew, we thought, how do we make the whole community, hundreds of youths, to be able to access the devices and also benefit from the internet that we provide? So we developed the Refugee Information Center into a multi-purpose community technology center, what we call the MCTC. And in the MCTC, we were able to bring out the entire benefits of open source technology, because we're able to now provide digital literacy on film production, Microsoft OpenSuite, and all of this content is open source. We use the European computer driving license. We are able to get content on how to develop and take advantage of the media, and also how to produce films and audio. So through these activities, the youth became empowered, and as we talk, because we make all our activities open source, we share them on social media, we share them through WhatsApp. Youth are able to learn and also get empowered, and because they see the impact that the technology is having on us as CTEN, as an organization, but also as individuals. So this resulted into a number of youth establishing their own enterprises and also community-based organizations. As we talk now, from CTEN being the only refugee, the first refugee founded community-based organization, we now have over 40 of these CBOs, not only in Rhinocamp now, but in Bidibidi, in Mvepi, in Kiriandongo, because of the impact of open source. And the way that we now work is that we are the open source. As CTEN, there is nothing hidden. We put all our information and the approaches and how we do things open. So we have not only contributed to open source, but we are the open source. Because if you want to know CTEN from the very creation in South Sudan, Yei, and then our activities in Uganda, you can find and go back to the very time we started until present. And as I talk, I am joining this conference from London, taking advantage of open source technology. I'm able to learn on how to establish an organization from scratch here. So CTEN is now a well-registered and legal organization here in London, and we are looking, the aim here is to how do we come closer to the tech giants here? Because for us to develop digital innovations in northern Uganda and Uganda as the whole region, then we need the tech giants to join us in this. We need more humanitarian organizations and development partners to come in so that we can benefit the thousands of refugees that are living in that region. Employment opportunities, the youth are able to get employed. There's a trend which is happening. We train people, they get jobs, experience, and then they are taken up. They go back to South Sudan, and now they are leaders back where they are. They are now leaders. So we really need to develop digital innovations through the power of open source. In partnership with the UNHCR and the Mercy Corps and a Berlin-based non-profit organization called the ROG, we really showed the youth that technology, open source technology, can be the source for not only empowering the entire community, but to develop the regions. And we are doing exactly that, and we hope to create new partnerships here in the Europe and also with the US-based organizations and do more in that part of the region where there are over 1 million refugees in Uganda currently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batali. Just a follow-up question for you. I know in your work interacting with refugees in Uganda, you come across some individuals who have they have a problem of language barrier, and very many resources in the digital space are in English. And we have refugees who sometimes don't understand English and they're not able to digest the information online that is in English. So how are you able to overcome that hurdle in your work with CTEN and your interaction with refugees?
Thank you. We are the refugees ourselves. The case of CTEN is very unique. So what we did was to attract teachers that are able to provide English literacy, and then together with the teachers that we have attracted in our team that came from the South Sudan, the combination of the two makes it very, very, first of all, easy to now provide English literature with the translator next by and assisting during the whole session, and graduating these that have passed in the English literature to then do digital literacy. But we also attracted their women through, first of all, what they like, what they say they like most, skills on tailoring. So then after learning skills on tailoring, we then bring them again to learn English and then eventually learn digital literacy. However, we did, through our partnership with the Mercy Corps and where we had multi-partnership with other tech-based organizations in Kampala, we have really thought about apps, how our youth in the camp can then develop apps. So this is the direction that we want to take from this year in order to be able to teach coding, and after that we will be able to develop apps that can provide auto translation so that it makes our work easier. So there is no excuse for us. Like what my Barbara said there, Barbara, thank you. Women are able to learn digital literacy. Those with babies on their backs, we're able to provide that space. And the language has never been a barrier. We have witnessed, if you go through our social media page, Facebook, CTEN, you will find that a lot of women have actually graduated, and God knows, others are already working in the digital space in South Sudan and within the refugee settlement. Others have created their own organizations that are able to provide repair services and digital literacy too. So no excuse.
Thank you, Mr. Batali. I really love how very flexible tech is, whether you have dropped out, whether you've had a child early, like you can still empower yourself through all the resources that are out there on the internet. Thank you very much, Mr. Batali. My next question will be directed to Mr. Allan Mbabani, who is the Executive Director for OpenStreetMap, Uganda. Mr. Batali, OpenStreetMap combines the use of open source software and data and is a successful example of a growing innovative business in Uganda, working both with for-profit and not-for-profit sector in Uganda. Please tell us about the experience and what role you believe open source is playing in your success.
Thank you. OpenStreetMap Uganda, being that it's an NGO, it's depending on donors' money. And with that means that resources are already limited. So we've been able to employ open source technology to help us to be able to achieve most of the goals that our partners are seeking. And with that, we've been able to use it in two perspectives. One, as a user, as well as creators. Our major vision is to promote the usage of OpenStreetMap platform. This is an open map that you can be able to access easily, you can be able to update easily without needing a lot of approvals to update your map. Now, if you look at the space of GIS, it's kind of right now being adopted in most of the sectors. And the challenge that most of people are having is that it's quite expensive to get someone to be able to help you to integrate spatial or location intelligence into your work. Now, with open source tools such as OpenStreetMap, such as Open Data Kit, such as Cabot Toolbox, all these tools are giving us an opportunity to be able to utilize the limited resources that we are having to be able to achieve the goals that we seek. Now, in the space of creating, we've been able to train a couple of people, as well as now this has been through community creation, which goes down from being a student, then moving to that time when you're not a student, as well as someone who's trying to innovate something. Now, with this, we train how to create your own data, because the question of sustainability is really huge in terms of resources still. Because if today you hire me to help you create data sets for a given area, tomorrow you may not have the same resources to hire me. So we try as much as possible to see that we train you and expose you to these tools that are already available to help you create your own data. And when you create your own data, we encourage you not to keep it only yourself. Because when you keep that to yourself, you're going to have a lot of duplication. For example, we did some mapping around most of the refugee settlements in Uganda, and we realized that many NGOs were doing the same thing before, but the only issue was there was no data sharing and no one knew where to find the data. So when we came in, we were able to close that gap of having this data not duplicated, but utilizing the extra resources to make sure that this data is available to identify the few gaps in service delivery in our refugee settlements. And right now, I'm very pretty sure most of the NGOs are using the Human Data Exchange portal to be able to access most of this data. And now that really also gives us a chance to be able to utilize it. Now, before even I joined the organization, during my university time, I had a project that I was to deliver to be able to get my degree. Now, the challenge I had as a student was I didn't have the money to create these data sets. So I had to leverage on OpenStreetMap, and I had to create some of the data sets myself, and I was able to come up with a thesis that I was able to graduate. Now, when you look at open source being provided, it's going to give leverage and also going to support most of the innovators to be able to come up with most of the solutions that are being hidden right now because of lack of resources. Yeah, so looking at all that, I believe that open source is really going to be innovative, and it's also going to give a chance for our government and also as a country to help us be able to, compete on the technology platforms.
Thank you, Mr. Allan. I think when you talked about spatial intelligence, you might have lost some of our audience members there. Just briefly help us explain what is GIS and what is mapping, because some of us are very new to those concepts. Just very briefly. Okay,
the most common product around location intelligence is the Google Maps. Most of us have been able to use Google Maps to be able to navigate, to be able to locate different places, and also to add into our softwares. If you look at the Safe Border, if you look at Safe Bango, if you look at some other applications like Bolt, Uber, they're using the location intelligence. And also right now, if you check also your WhatsApp, you're able to share your location to someone and they're able to locate you. Now, when you look at Google platform, it's a very good one, but only for urban areas. When you get time and really go out there in parts that are not so urban, it's going to be hard for you to navigate. You're going to look at your map and you may get a message that no village ahead. But being that maybe you have been there before as a person, you know the village is there. Now, OpenStreetMap comes in to help you in that perspective. So if you go to an area and that area doesn't exist on the map, it's your responsibility to add it on the map so that someone else never gets the same challenge you have gotten on your end. Yeah, so it's just more around using maps to make sure that we are able to solve some solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allan. I think that has been, that is more relatable to our audience members because there's AYDIAs for Google Maps, WhatsApp location, and all other location apps. Thank you very much. I think we've had all the submissions from my expert panel, and I know our audience members have some questions that they would like to ask. We are receiving questions both from our in-person audience and from our online audience. So I think there's a direction directed to Mr. Richard Zulu. Isaac from NITA Uganda would like to ask, how can the public sector or the government exploit open source, not just NITA Uganda, but the various ministries and departments?
Okay, that's a hard question coming from NITA. How? I believe for me there's a number of aspects. Again, I go back to my point. How can the government? One of the things that I think we're learning out of collaborating with government and trying to build for government is the buy-in from other ministries, departments, and agencies beyond NITAU and Ministry of ICT. And I think for me, the first thing is internal alignment within the different ministries, departments, and agencies on their needs. Their buy-in with regards to the strategic approach of how NITAU will leverage local talents, local solutions to address those needs, right? I was recently building a digital strategy for the Justice Department. And you can see that there are opportunities everywhere. But the struggle is, how do all these different initiatives that are happening or could happen speak to each other, right? To provide, because at outside as a citizen, for me, I just need a service. How Ministry of Works communicates to Ministry of ICT, communicates to NIRA is none of my business, right? But we can only achieve that when we have a holistic approach to this need and to how we are going to solve it together. Now, luckily enough, we have the digital transformation program. Through this programmatic approach that we now have in the National Development Plan. So now, once we have those needs, then it's very easy to come to the community and say, guys, look, these are my needs as government. These are the opportunities we can create. Developing this, what open source software do you think we could use? These are the opportunities it will create for you and for your businesses. I think for me, if we don't address that root cause of alignment, and it happens everywhere, even in the private sector, even in the development sector. In the Ministry of Health, you'll find very many different platforms that do not speak to each other. That even if we go and create solutions for impact, at the end of that day, the value that will be derived by a vulnerable young person who's using this digital tool will not be holistic in nature. And for me, I think it's having that core vision and that strategy. If we get the root cause of that, then we can possibly move forward. These developers, and they're happy to support, but people have to see that their effort is worth it. It's not something I'm going to build and it stays as a pilot and it's not adopted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Richard. My next question is going to be directed to Mr. Peter Batali from CTEN. Rebecca Florence, Nanono, and Dan Ahimbisi were from the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Both these people are asking, how are you ensuring that the most underserved people in Uganda can access and contribute to open source? And how are we creating a leveling playing ground? How can you support communities that don't have access to internet with digital and open source solutions? Mr. Peter Batali.
Thank you. Very serious question there. Yes, we have addressed the issue of access through taking the centers, technology centers, to the community. That has been our approach, so that the issue of distance, the issue of protection, the issue of money, affordability is all addressed. However, most important is networking. For us to be able to address needs of the community holistically, we thrive on networking and collaboration. One of these examples is collaborating with the Berlin-based non-profit organization, ROG. And through that, we were able to have developers within. We have been able to create something called the ASCOTech. The trainees that we had in our center were able to create ASCOTech, which is shared through Wikipedia, and through that, other youth are able to learn and be creators, but also beneficiaries. If you can repeat the question, the other part of the question, I wanted to come to it.
The other part of the question is, how can you support communities that don't have access to internet with digital and open source solutions?
Yes, the solution is the multi-purpose community technology centers. Establish these centers in all the zones or the refugee settlement. We call it the zonal approach. Wherever you see refugees, take these centers to them, because then we can then have internet connectivity and the solar system, clean energy, and then also the devices, and then bring or attract people that are able to provide this training. It can be done physically, and also it can be done virtually. To strengthen these services that we provide to the most vulnerable, we are trying to collaborate with the institutions here in the UK so that we can leverage the expertise from here, and our refugees in the settlement can be able to directly gain this knowledge from here. But also, if we can be able to do massive awareness, not only within the refugee settlement, but in the region, in Uganda and East Africa, I think that we have a very big resource or talent in the region that we could then come together as a tech body. You know, we have never seen doctors union, teachers union, but I have never heard of the tech union, you know, ICT professionals coming together as a union to address holistically the needs of the most vulnerable. As we have proven in the settlement, this multipurpose community technology center is accessible by the poorest of youth, the women, the elders, but then we forget the elderly persons. They also want to be able to get connected to their loved ones. So the elderly persons also can be trained on tech. So the solution is in the multipurpose community technology centers that are solar powered, internet connected, and all the personnel or the instructors are residing and living with the community. This way, any questions or issues can be addressed. So we appeal to the humanitarian partners, development actors, the tech giants, to really embrace this approach. I hope I've answered that question. Thank you.
I think you've answered it appropriately. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Batali. We have another question from Allan and Anura from iVenture Africa. Or let me start with the question from John from YSAT. John is asking, this is directed to Mr. Allan Mbabani, but maybe also Ms. Barbara can chime in. How can open source help grassroots innovators effectively respond to pandemics like the COVID-19 pandemic, especially breaking the top-down procurement chain? Any experience or projects you have come across?
Around the COVID moment in Uganda, we had a project which was to promote local procurement. The challenge we looked at there was that there were organizations coming together to provide the PPEs to the frontline workers, and they had to procure this from China. Now, when you see the time lags and the expenses in travel that were there just to bring in this equipment, those resources were enough to increase on the PPE that should be provided. Now, when we approached the NGOs and other people were trying to intervene, their issues were people do not exist that provide this. And also, they had the other issue was quality. Now, OpenStreetMap, together with another organization known as Field Ready and Needs List. Needs List is an organization that is more into supporting people who are doing manufacturing to meet the standards that are required internationally. Now, for us as OpenStreetMap, what we were trying to answer was that do we really have these people existing in these communities? Because now, if I wanted to get, say, face shields for people, say in northern Uganda, I don't have to come to Kampala or even go outside of the country. All I need is maybe to go to Gulu and visit one of the recycling farms, and they're able to provide this. But the issue there was that these people are not well known. So when we put these manufacturers, when we put these people who are providing most of the resources onto the map, they can easily be known that they do exist. Now, that is just part of a solution. And then other interventions can be put in place to be that the local procurement is guided. Thank you.
Just to chime in a little bit. I think in terms of pandemics, COVID and any other cholera and all those that might come in, and how open source can help or young people innovating around that and kind of mapping, creating maps of where the outbreaks are. So me, as a person who's in Kampala, before I travel somewhere else, I could just check and be able to see. You could also use USSD or whatever to be able to see what's happening in the different places. And anyone literally could also be in terms of floods, you know, when the roads are impassable and you've already reached, and then the things that happen in Kampala when you, even just see at Kira Road Police where the water is either too much and you can't go back and there is traffic and all. So OpenStreet can help in such a way that if we create innovations that people can easily map what's happening in the different places, and all you have to do is go and see what's happening to avoid either those areas or be able to plan your way around them. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This actually reminds me of a project that I think Google, in partnership with Andela, actually came up with in the pandemic period, whereby they were encouraging innovators to come up with solutions, applications, or websites that could help solve a problem that has been brought about by the pandemic. So sometimes in pandemics such as this, organizations such as Andela, Google, Facebook usually come up with hackathons or like development initiatives or programs whereby developers are encouraged to come up with a solution that can try to solve a problem that has been brought about by the pandemic. And there were very many participants all over Africa, and the winners of that initiative actually proceeded to ship their product to the market. Yeah, I thought I could add on to that. So we have another question from one of our in-person, from somebody from our in-person audience, Mr. Allan and Anura from iVenture Africa. Maybe I can invite you forward to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. My question is directed to Aidah Bukubuza. Yes, in the capitalistic nature of the economy and profit really being the bottom line and saving a buck, how can organizations be more inclusive, factoring in the costs associated with things like nurseries, maternity leave, etc.? That's my question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Allan, for that very interesting question. Yeah, so I would rather think that when we are talking about inclusivity, like what Ms. Barbara talked about earlier on in terms of having enabling environments in spaces where we do operate, not only limiting to women, but as humans as a whole. So for example, if there are spaces where we should be able to make sure that we call into account for, like for example, government organizations should have these particular nursery spaces to enable women, have very enabling environments working spaces without any hurdles and hassles. So for me, I would feel like if we make that more reasonable, even in private sector, it does not limit you from, in a world of where we're talking about, okay, this is an investment whereby you are allowing another person or you're enabling a person to be able to be in a space where they don't have to worry about running off from work, taking on leave, yet you have to pay them for their extra hours and resources. So if they're in a particular place where there is an enabling environment that allows them to work comfortably with flexibility and ease, like what Ms. Barbara shared about earlier on, then there is no need to worry about in terms of capital. It becomes an investment and it can bring in returns. That's what I can say. I don't know if anyone else has any other contribution in that regard.
Yeah, I would like to add something. So,
Thanks.
As a person in private sector or wherever it is, when you hire someone, what's the goal? Is it to have that person in office or to deliver specific deliverables that you want this person to deliver? So it shouldn't matter where this person is delivering from as long as the delivery is happening. So if you cannot afford to put daycare in your daycare or those extra services that would make it more flexible for women, let them work from home. We all experienced the pandemic, right? There was a lockdown. Did the companies close? Some, yes, closed by nature of how they are. But most of our organizations kept working with our people online. And if anything, that was able to show us the nature of the people that you have. There are people in my team that now I know whether so-and-so shows up or not, I'm not going to be like, where are you and all that, because I know they are a person who delivers. In others, actually, when you look at the research, people work more when they're at home even. Because you're not rushing back home and what, you find yourself at 6 p.m. and you're still working because you have a deliverable. So what I would say to private sector or anyone else really, just make it very clear what you want someone to deliver, and it shouldn't matter where they are delivering from. And you don't have to incur any costs if someone is working from their own home. Yeah.
I completely agree with you there, Ms. Barbara. Thank you for that. I think I'm going to direct my next question to Richard and Marcel. Maybe Marcel can also chime in. Dan Ahimbisiwe, you have a question. I will invite you forward to ask your question.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to ask how open source developers are able to make money to sustain their projects and models.
Okay. I'll speak a bit to that, and Marcel will give an example of how people are using their tools. So from my experience, largely from individuals, it largely comes through consulting, building your capacity to support an entity like an NGO or government in terms of maintaining the tool, the open source tool. So for instance, if you look at DHIS2, right, which is used for data records in health, there's an entity called HISP, Health Information System Strengthening Program. It's a company made of individuals that have built capabilities to support anyone building on DHIS2 to actually customize for that. There's another one called Good Citizen that also built capabilities around DHIS2. I recall in 2000, was it 12, ThoughtWorks, which is a large American company, at that time opened an office here to support UNICEF on an open source tool called Rapid FTR. And those were consulting fees. So that's one way that individuals actually make money. The second is you can decide to take an open source product and totally add value to it and have your own offering out of that. The example Marcel gave of Red Hat takes Linux as an operating system, repackages it and builds products that are used to network computers. right? So that's also another way that you can make an income out of open source tools. Marcel, do you have anything, or that's all?
Yes, I think what you just said is totally correct. I mentioned before that in terms of creating revenue streams with open source tools in development cooperation, well, we see usually NGOs as our partners, and we have the experience of 6 years of doing that. So basically, what you said, consulting is an important part. The second thing that you said, I would call it customization. Taking something and creating something customized. And the third part is coaching. And actually, you can have the 3 parts, for example, within one project with an NGO. So as I said, often an NGO gets a request for proposals in order to receive funding. And if they have to use a digital tool, they will need consulting in first of all, to understand what can be done, what cannot be done, what can be created to really answer this request for proposals, to target this goal, to target those beneficiaries. So if you have the expertise of understanding open source in development cooperation, understanding the tools, also the tools that we've used so far, you can provide consulting, and then based on that create a customized solution for this NGO based on open source tools that are already available. And once you have that tool, then comes the third part, the coaching part, because often those tools are used by health workers, community workers in outreach operations, or sometimes they're even used by the beneficiaries. But coaching is involved because the NGO, the workers, health workers, and the beneficiaries, they need to get a head start. Sometimes there's digital literacy training involved, but usually it's around making people understand how the tool works and how they can use the tool efficiently in their work. So those are the 3 parts, and I think really Richard described it very well. You have consulting, you have customization, and you have also coaching, and you can have the 3 within one project that you're working on with an NGO. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel, for that submission. I hope, Dan, you've had your question answered. Okay. My next question, the next question is from Allan Lule, who is from the Makerere Innovation and Incubation Center. Mr. Allan Lule, you can come forward and ask your question. Yes, yes.
Okay, I think I can from here. Yes, I think I have 3 questions, but the first one goes to Richard Zulu. Yeah, so part of the obligation of open source, of course, is to encourage innovation and, of course, try to scale up products. So my question is around co-creation. I think open source has a clear journey for development if we co-create with already existing local corporations. Why? They are developing products which are already being consumed. So you've heard about the Open API by MTN, developers developing on top of it, and more the likes. So how do you think we can really drive these conversations and increase the participation of such corporations to involve themselves more with the local developers? Because by then, they could have a value coming on where the developers are actually improving their products, which could also now turn up into a win-win for the developers themselves as well. So how could we drive more of those coming on? Because it seems they're mostly structured by these companies and they're just once in a while, but then how do we keep encouraging most of these to come on along the way? So that goes to you. So next one goes to Barbara. Yeah, so Barbara, I liked when you hinted about the training of technology in the schools and the lakes. But I still have a misconception that the challenge still comes back to the curriculums that we normally use for training technology and more of the likes. I was very grateful when the Ministry of Education sometime back reached out to us to amend the curriculum for, I think, high school education to now include elements of IT to do with the app development. But then from you, I want to know how best do you think the curriculum now can integrate open source learning in that case? Sure, thank you.
Allan, just to clarify your question, is your question how
do we encourage more co-creation or local companies with the developers?
Local companies like corporates? Yes,
like MTN, exactly. MTN, the Airtels, and many others who are in the tech space.
Okay. So we have to, this is my opinion, we have to really put ourselves in the shoes of the people we want to bring into the fold. And for me, when you talk of corporates, there are values to the shareholder. Recently, they are changing, right? Because of all this talk about environment sustainability, right? But I think for me, when you look at a business like MTN and the value it's trying to create for a normal consumer, I always ask people, MTN does not differentiate between a refugee and me here in town. It's one service. And I'll be forced to use it and pay for it because there's value. And I think that's how we have to start looking at the way we roll out open source tools for the most vulnerable groups. These individuals are not beggars. You have to look at them as people with dignity, as people who can be consumers. And if you start taking that perspective and trying to see the type of value you're trying to drive down, right? Changing your mindset from, yes, even if it's being subsidized by a development partner, but if you're trying to work with private sector approaches, the mindset is a bit different. You're focused more on the value, you're focused more on the sustainability. And it's only through this that you can co-create with corporates, because you have a very clear value proposition that you're giving to the most vulnerable, right? I have never seen a telecom say airtime in a refugee settlement is less by 1,000 shillings. Mm-hmm. I have never. But don't they use mobile services? And that's the only way we shall drive adoption of these services, period. It's not because there's a shiny open source tool and I can use it to collect data. No. What is the need? All the way from the most vulnerable. Then bring the corporate on the table and show them the value that they will create for such a person and how is that sustainable. For me, that's the only mindset I think that will lead to private sector actors taking a very critical role in terms of how they extend value down the line. Yeah, so the most vulnerable go through stages, right? You have the emergency stage and then other stages. So you have to know in that life cycle, where do you want certain actors to play and engage? Yeah.
Very quickly, I know our time is fast spent. So on curriculum, how to get open source. When you ask me that question, Allan, I think about so many other things or the issues that we've found in the field even before curriculum and all. But one is for us all to sit, whoever is acting in this space, so private sector, government, to sit on a table and kind of define what that curriculum looks like and the value that it presents. But more importantly, the ability for our teachers to deliver whatever content we are putting out. For me, that comes before anything, the ability of the teachers to deliver whatever it is that we are trying to put out. So even if you have the best curriculums, if the people who are supposed to deliver them cannot, you're doing nothing. So yeah.
Oh yeah. So I think that was our last question from both audiences. Would have loved to entertain more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. But this does not mean you can't stop. You need to stop asking your questions. We would like to extend this conversation and discussion to social media. So I think we all have our in-person audience has tags, so you can turn behind and scan the QR tag on your tag, the QR code. And then you can direct your question to any of the panelists because they're all on Twitter, they're all on social media. And then I'm sure they'll respond to your questions. So this has, I would like to conclude our expert panel discussion today. I would like to thank our panelists, Mr. Richard Zulu from Outbox, Ms. Barbara from Women in Technology, Mr. Allan from OpenStreetMap, Mr. Marcel from URIDU, Mr. Batali from CTEN, and Ms. Aidah from AYDIA, Gender and Technology Initiative. Thank you so much for gracing this event and providing your expert views on how we can use open source as a model for local digital innovations. These have been really insightful. And I would also like to thank the organizers of this event, URIDU, the Response Innovation Lab, and also the partners and organizers of the Global Digital Development Forum, USAID, Chemonix, Deloitte. There are quite a number. And I'd also like to thank our audience today. You've been very active, you've been very engaging, and hopefully you'll attend our next Global Digital Development Forum. Yeah, so there's also, before we leave, there are some forms on your tables that you can fill in. Each of you has been provided with a form. Please take some 2 minutes to answer those questions. We shall collect them after this is done. Yeah. So this comes to, I think, let me invite Charlène to.
And a big thank you to Deborah for the great moderation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists once again.